Hello, and welcome to the Natural State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin. It is my belief that the natural state of any living organism is health, and that our artificial habitat has forced us into having artificial health problems. This show is my attempt to dive deep and learn about using nutrition, sleep, movement, relationships, and more to help you reclaim your natural state of health in a modern world and show you how to thrive in an environment that's stacked against you. If you enjoyed today's show, you can find out more details and information at dranthonygustin.com. On today's episode, Chris Irvin joins me back for sort of a hybrid Q&A plus just overview of how our nutrition experiments have been changing recently. So what we've been doing is eating a lot of carbohydrates. So maybe the lockdown has just made us absolutely lose our minds, or maybe we have a reason for it. So I hope you guys tune in and we break down sort of why we've been doing this for the last 12 months. Me a little bit before Chris, and I convinced him to do it, and now he's been doing it as well. What we've been noticing subjectively from mood, energy, etc., all the way down to objective measures of body composition, body fat, resting metabolic rate, and so on. So people have asked us a lot of questions. We're going to answer those, why we're doing this, what we're finding. But yeah, I mean, we wrote the book Keto Answers, obviously, and this is something that, you know, we're always trying to push the envelope and learn as much as we can. And I think that there's a lot of dogma around keto right now, and it's either with a lot of things in life that you need to be sort of on one side or the other side. We only have a two-part multiple choice question here, where it's you either eat all carbs or no carbs. And we're trying to figure out, does something exist in the middle, and who can benefit from carbohydrates, how much, timing, etc. So we cover all those questions in this episode. And if you are considering adding carbs back in, you're wondering why we're doing it, this is a perfect episode for you guys, and I hope you enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Neurohacker Collective. I've been using their products on and off the last few years, and have always been a huge fan of how they formulate their products, their dosing, and they just don't mess around. So Dr. Greg Kelly, their lead product formulator, is actually on the podcast previously if you want to check that episode out. But you can trust that Neurohacker Collective is always doing 100% dosing backed up by research. A lot of other companies, what they do is they sprinkle in amounts of ingredients, so that way you're not actually getting the full amount that is required to have a physiological effect. You just get a little sprinkling and dosing in there. Their products are so effective that Dr. Kelly actually recommends taking 2 days off a week, and their serving size is 7 really huge capsules, which just shows how much active ingredient they actually put in their product. I am personally a huge fan of their caffeine-free version of their product, Qualia Mind, and I take it on an empty stomach with exogenous ketones in the morning when I know that I really want to get a bunch of uninterrupted deep work hours done. I feel in the zone for literally hours, and the best part is there's no crazy crash afterwards. If you're not a nootropic person, they also have an amazing product called Eternus that contains all the precursors to NAD, which is far more effective than taking direct NAD supplements to reduce oxidative damage to your cells. Again, love the formulation and how they went about making this product. If you want to try out any Neurohacker Collective products, just head to neurohacker.com and use the code AG15 for 15% off all of their products. That's neurohacker.com and code AG15 for 15% off all of their products. This episode is brought to you by Paleo Valley. I've been a huge fan of this company for years, ever since I met the founders at a conference, I'd say 4 years ago plus, and have been eating their 100% grass-fed, grass-finished beef sticks ever since then. The biggest reason, though, recently why I asked them to come on the show as a sponsor is that they do a lot of support in regenerative farming. They actually continue to reinvest into helping small farmers scale and are really building out an amazing sort of supply chain to help regenerative agriculture scale. Not only that, their beef sticks aren't dry as a bone and leave that weird Slim Jim style waxy coating in your mouth. They are plump and juicy, and not in a weird way. We gobble these guys up at the Perfect Keto offices when we don't have time to get a full meal in, and they're the perfect real food snack. If you're looking for one of the best beef sticks around that are not only great tasting, but responsibly sourced, check out Paleo Valley. And the great news is listeners of this podcast get 15% off. So just go to paleovalley.com/AG15 or use code AG15 at checkout at paleovalley.com for 15% off. That's PALEOVALLEY.com/AG15. All right, beef stick boy, let's go. Chris, you're snacking on a bunch of beef sticks. I get his fuel up for the show.
Gotta get that beef in.
Yeah. So today we're doing another Q&A episode, but also sort of a profile on how Chris and I are Going to be locked up in keto jail soon, keto prison, keto police coming for us because we've over the last couple of months, me so more than Chris have been eating more carbohydrates.
Don't tell him.
It's
out.
This is the coming out party, man.
Oh,
here it is.
All right. This is the moment.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell everybody? I mean,
you better change your Instagram name at this point.
We'll talk about that. Well, we're going to dive into carbs in this episode, but before we do that, you mentioned that you're eating a little bit more carbs. What's your reason why?
I don't know. Why not, man?
I'm just eating cake and ice cream.
Cake and ice cream.
Donuts and
sandwiches.
You keep walking into the office with donuts every morning. I'm just like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I just have been so low carb for so long and I just also had some issues with energy, focus, fatigue, things like that. Wasn't sleeping as well and thought, okay, this is probably, I don't know. I just want to try it out. I'm going to try modifying a little bit of things, my calories, my carb intake, my timing, all these different things. It's been a long time since I've been eating like this. Wanted to see sort of how I felt, my body comp changed, things like that. So I've been toying around with it. And I think it started like right before quarantine started. So we're recording this early June. That was like early March. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm like starting to figure out how to eat again. It's really weird.
Yeah.
When I first started doing it, I'm like, how the hell are you supposed to eat it?
How do you eat carbs?
Yeah, what's going on? And so it's been a challenge. And we'll get into some of these questions, but it hasn't all been great, but it also hasn't all been bad either.
Yeah.
So I'm not dead. This is good. It's a good thing. I think a lot of people
still breathing.
Yeah. I think a lot of people think I need to be injecting myself with insulin by now. I have type 2 diabetes. It hasn't happened, luckily, but I haven't dropped dead of a heart attack. I don't have any sort of brain degeneration that I know of. What are some of the things that people think? I am fatter.
I was gonna say, did you pack on weight?
I am fatter, so there's that. We'll chat about that in a second. But yeah, it's trying to figure it out. Been wearing a continuous blood glucose monitor for almost the whole time, and yeah, what has your experience been?
So I'm just kind of starting back up with my experience with it. Basically, like, we were playing so much basketball over the last week. I mean, we played 6-7 days in a row, and by day 3 or 4, I mean, when we play too, we're pretty competitive when we play. So it's 2-3 hours of us pushing our bodies way past what it should be. And we did that for 6-7 days. And I was just I think I just feel depleted. I think the third day we went out there, I couldn't even pick myself up off the ground. I was so tired. So I started incorporating a little bit carbs. And when we say carbs too, we'll talk about, I know there's a question in here about carb sources. We're not talking about donuts and ice cream. We're talking about quality whole food sources of carbs. But my experience has been good with it so far. My body's been taken to it pretty easily. I'm not going overboard with it. So I've been testing my blood glucose while I'm doing it as well, and finding some foods that my body responds better to versus other ones, which I think is always a good thing to know. But yeah, it's been good. I'm still staying below 100, probably in the 80 to 100 gram range a day.
Yeah,
but
it's pretty low.
Coming from where I was before, where it was probably 20, 30, eating mostly carnivore. That's pretty big jump. Yeah,
certainly a shift. And another thing why I wanted to add it in is I'm just starting to think more seasonally.
Yeah.
And makes sense to restrict, look at the foods around your region, especially that region that matches your genetics the most. So for me, it's, Northern European, and winters get brutal, not much stuff grows. Basically, you can only find animals, kill animals, eat them. Some root vegetables, but, a little bit of leafy greens, but primarily you would ferment stuff. This is how we've done it for a long time.
Yeah.
And so I think more carnivore-ish, really low carb over the winters, but as spring comes out, especially in this region of Texas, it's stuff gets ripe so fast. Mm-hmm. And it may be advantageous to eat more carbohydrates in the summer and then restrict. I mean, we talked about it in the previous podcast episode about how things can be pulsatile. And hormones can be pulsatile. I think the same thing happens with our transition through seasons and how food availability has, why are we trying to mess with what's normal? And I think that the easiest thing people can do is just sort of go to the farmer's market.
Yeah.
That is year round, hopefully, where you live. If you can't find one, go to eatwild.com. It's the best aggregate place that I know of right now. But look what's sort of ebbing and flowing throughout the year there. Mm-hmm. And then that's sort of how you should frame what you're eating.
Right.
And I think that there's some things where, yes, we've, modified our environment so we can grow things year round primarily, but if you go to like a Whole Foods or a larger grocery store where you can get literally any food year round all the time, like that is not normal.
Right.
And I'm just trying to like continue to ask myself these questions of how can we get out of nature's way, basically. Like every time we try to think that we're better than nature, we'd fuck everything up.
Right.
And I'm just trying to step back and be like, okay, you do your work and I'll just float along with.
Yeah.
I'll just surrender sort of what foods are given to us at certain times of the year.
Yeah.
So that's how I think about it. And just another hypothesis that I've been thinking about. And so yeah, we have some questions today regarding all this stuff. So let's roll into it.
Cool. So first question we got is from Coach Chris B91, and it's what's your take on timing of carbs? I've heard conflicting information like glycemic variability is better in the AM, but eating them at night is better for sleep. Thoughts?
Yeah. So this is something that I think is going to vary per individual so much. And with all things nutrition, never go on whatever you hear on the internet.
Yeah.
So don't look at, especially when it's like one person or three people. You are such an individual person when it comes to nutrition. And I think that, with carbohydrates, we've talked a lot about this in the last couple of weeks, but if you are metabolically broken and you can't fast and you can't be on a ketogenic diet without feeling like shit, you probably shouldn't be eating carbohydrates. Like that's just an indication that you've eaten too many, you've eaten too many of the wrong foods, and your metabolism is not working properly.
Right.
So you should be able to utilize fat as a fuel system. And if you can't, then you probably shouldn't be running primarily on carbohydrates. So you should fix that fuel system.
Yeah.
So that way you can tap into that if you want, and then start going back to eat carbs. So I think that like this whole conversation is predicated on the fact that like I think that people need to look at their metabolic history. And this is why I think the ketogenic diet is so effective for so many people, is because we've damaged our metabolism for so long,
right,
and need to sort of hit the reset button and clean up our metabolism so we can appropriately look at foods and digest foods and put them to use in our body in an appropriate way.
Right.
And this is another one of those things where the timing of carbs, I wonder how much of this has to do with people's metabolisms and their response to carbohydrates and the foods they're eating.
Yeah.
So the question is like, what type of carbs? That's a huge question. Are you eating straight honey? Are you eating donuts and ice cream? Are you eating sweet potatoes? Like, are you eating them with fat, with protein?
Yeah.
Are you eating them? Is it after a workout, before a workout? And so these are the questions that I'm trying to figure out myself for sure. And I found a lot out that we can get into in a little bit, but this is something that I'm sure you could pick out 100 people who are eating carbohydrates in an appropriate way, eating whole food sources, and they all respond differently to them. I mean, Martha, my fiance, and I both had a continuous blood glucose monitor on where we're eating more carbohydrates, and she reacts to literally nothing. Nothing can spike her blood sugar. I haven't found anything that spikes her blood sugar. It's bizarre.
Interesting.
Like she can eat straight honey out of the jar and it won't spike it.
Wow.
It's wild.
That's crazy.
And for me, it's like if I don't do things perfectly, and this has been the case, I think, for my whole life, is I was super overweight when I was younger. Like now I have like a pretty good sense of like what foods now. But like, for instance, I was toying around with rice. For instance, like white rice versus like jasmine white rice versus like Louisiana white rice.
Yeah.
Versus black rice versus wild rice versus brown rice. All of these things have completely different profiles on how they react to my body.
Yeah.
And so if you just say, how do carbs, timing, how does that work for you? It's like, well, which carbs?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the way I agree, I think it matters like what carbs, what you're eating them with. And like I've heard, I know that there's some stuff out there about like having them before bed might help with like some neurotransmitter production and help with like sleep and stuff like that. I think the way that I like to look at it, less about like, looks like he's saying like conflicting information on glycemic variability. I don't think that that's a reason. I don't think there's enough there to separate your carb intake timing because of that, but I think there's other reasons to do it. So for instance, I feel like if you are eating carbohydrates, the goal should be to maintain a level of metabolic flexibility that will allow you to continue to be able to utilize carbohydrates well. So, what we probably don't want to be doing is having carbohydrates all day, every day, right? So my personal preference is if I'm having carbohydrates is to not have them in the morning because, you're waking up, you're already probably 8 hours into a fast. If you are, if you're keeping your carbs restricted through maybe the afternoon, you're kind of able to extend that fast, which I think is going to help you maintain a degree of metabolic flexibility, which is going to help you put to use those carbohydrates when you do eat them a little bit better. So that's kind of a way that I like to look at it.
Yeah.
I kind of look at like insulin sensitivity as like this pressure gauge, right? Where it's like there's things that increase pressure and then there's things that decrease it, and there's levers that we can pull, right? So if we're increasing pressure through carbohydrate consumption, which is going to happen to some degree, then we have to make sure that we're relieving that pressure in other areas. So whether that's through incorporating fasting, whether it's carb restricting for different times of the day, carb restricting throughout the week cyclically or something like that, I think there's something that you need to do to make sure that you maintain that metabolic flexibility as you go.
Yeah, which would have been built into our environment naturally in the form of food scarcity and availability.
Right.
And whether that was for a couple of days at a time or a couple of weeks at a time, it would have happened. And now we basically need to manufacture it ourselves.
Yeah.
What I've done for timing for myself has been dictated by my activity levels and how much and when I'm working out. So,
right.
For instance, I will not eat carbs in a day until I work out. And then when I work out, I will have some sort of protein, like usually a blend of collagen, beef, and whey with sweet potato powder during my workout. And then after I work out, I'll start eating carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And that's how I will approach it. And so if my workout's in the afternoon, then I eat them in the afternoon and the evening. If it's in the morning, then I eat them in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I felt best that way. And so I think I want to get into this in a little bit, but I have an idea around eating carbs and fat together, and never doing that essentially. Yeah. Then I think that if you do that, regardless if you're going to eat the carbohydrates in the morning or the evening, you're now going to give your body a window where you're essentially in like a ketogenic state the rest of the time. So in my mind, it doesn't really matter as much if like you're extending a fast from when you wake up. It's not, 'cause if I stop eating carbs at noon, well then like my quote unquote fasting clock, my ketogenic clock is like starting at noon and then lasting until the next morning if I work out in the morning again. Yeah. So whereas like you said, like eating carbohydrates throughout the entire day, and I have felt way better putting them around my workout.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
So that's my timing.
Cool.
But test for yourself. Test the foods, test the variability of the foods, test what you're eating them with. And then, get as detailed as you want. Like, it's been 3-4 months and I'm still figuring out stuff for myself.
Yeah. And I think too, you also have to think about, what's the goal behind this question, right? Like if you're asking this question because you're trying to, it's coming from this coach, Chris, maybe he's trying to help like a client. If we're talking about like weight loss, I think that like, if we're talking between having carbs in the morning or at night, I think the difference in your weight loss success is going to be pretty small. I don't think there's going to be a big difference. Like you said, I think what probably matters most is whole day. If you're just smashing carbs from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, I think that's probably not going to be ideal. But I think it's just giving your body a break on some end. Like you said, maybe it's in the morning, maybe it's at night. You probably should adjust it to your schedule if you're a morning exerciser versus an evening exerciser, whatever that is. But like, I think that at the end of the day, it's probably going to make a pretty small difference if we're talking about having them in the morning versus having them at night. So, all right. Next question we have is from Biohacking Kairos. And the question is, it must be your people, chiropractors, huh?
Yeah, maybe.
Must be your people. All right. What are your favorite carb sources for cyclical keto?
Well, let's just reframe this question. Can we just do that?
Yeah.
What are your favorite carb sources?
Right.
What foods do you eat that contain carbohydrates?
Yeah.
We
can talk about cyclic separate.
Yeah, I don't think that really matters for me. Like if I'm cycling in on a ketosis or I'm just eating carbs all the time, it doesn't really matter. I'm still figuring this out. Like I said, when I first started eating, I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to eat? I forgot.
Yeah.
I have been gravitating a lot towards sweet potatoes. Mm-hmm. Again, variability here. I can, like the Japanese white sweet potatoes, crush me. Feel terrible afterwards, but like purple, like yam sweet potatoes, feel great.
Yeah.
Not purple, what am I saying? Purple. Purple are great. Purple are good too, but also like the orange deep orange ones. Yeah. So purple and orange, totally fine, but like whiter sweet potatoes, destroy me. Mm-hmm. So learn that lesson. Plantains destroy me, which is weird because last year I ate them occasionally and they were totally fine.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like what you're saying is the answer to this is that you can't, I mean, the question is what's your favorite, so we can say, but like if you're trying to determine what are the best sources for you to eat, I mean, everybody at our office basically has been wearing a continuous blood glucose monitor. Like, so I've been talking a lot with people about like different foods, and it's crazy the variability that we see. Like I was talking to Alex one day and he was saying, I don't remember what food it was, but some food that was like crushing, I think it was sweet potatoes actually, were like crushing his blood sugar, but for me, they're great. And then we were talking about some like cassava flour was another one we were talking about. Somebody said that like their blood sugar results are great on it. Mine spikes when I have cassava flour. So it's like, I think it's really important, especially if you haven't been eating a lot of carbs, to be doing some sort of testing, whether that's with the CGM or just like doing a blood or a finger prick. You probably need to be seeing your responses to these foods.
Yeah. And the fact that last year plantains were fine for me and this year they're not.
Right.
I don't know how to explain that yet. Mm-hmm. However, it's worth noting that even for yourself, things can change over your life year to year.
No man steps in the same river twice, right?
Wow, so wise. So wise. So those, I've been digging rice a lot, actually. I've done historically in the past, terrible with rice, great with rice now. Yeah. So I don't know if this is like a microbiome shift or what it is. It's probably something to do with that. Yeah. Or some sort of sensitivity that I've developed. I have no idea.
I feel like that's what's complicated about this is I think so many times people think that like nutrition is as simple as input equals output, but it's like if you've ever seen what like a metabolism chart looks like and you see all of the different variables at play, it is not an input output thing. There's so many different variabilities that can be at play. It's like, what was your stress levels like last year when you were eating those foods compared to this year, right? Like what was your sleep like?
Activity level.
Your activity
weather,
levels.
Yeah, everything.
Gut microbiome, all of that stuff, I feel like. So, that is interesting. I don't think I've ever personally thought about what like the difference between, me eating, if just because a carb works for me now doesn't mean that it works for me later. I never thought about it like that. So there's probably a reason to check in periodically with that to make sure that your body's still handling it the way it was before. Yeah.
I mean, what's sort of interesting too, though, is that, so blueberries is another one, like fruit, berries in general.
Good or bad?
Good. Okay. Yeah. So I'm eating a lot of those, but I'm trying to, like when I first started this out, I was eating like 120 grams of carbs. And then I've been trying to do like 160 grams of late just to see how I feel. Mm-hmm. And I've been big around like telling people to eat things only that spoil for a really long time. And like doing that and trying to get over 100 to like 120 and past that is like nearly impossible.
Good luck.
It's nearly impossible.
Yeah.
And I'm now at the
Unless
point,
you're eating like cereal and Pop-Tarts and stuff.
Well, again, it's like, like not real food.
Right. Yeah.
Like I'm talking about like vegetables that spoil within like a week or two.
Yeah, for sure.
And if that's the case, then it's like, and now I'm just getting to the point of like experimenting to see where I can push my body. Mm-hmm. And I think like going to carnivore is like an extreme experiment. And for me, like going to over 150 grams of carbohydrates is an extreme experiment. Mm-hmm. And I just want to see it. I want to push my boundaries and learn for myself. But yeah, I mean, like to basically find enough food where you can eat, like I can't eat 8 sweet potatoes in a day. Mm-hmm. I would puke because it would be too much food while also hitting protein levels. It's like, there's a lot of days, like I'm only eating like 1,700, 2,000 calories a day right now, typically because like I just can't eat any more than that.
Yeah. Hunger levels just aren't there.
Yeah. It's really, really difficult. So, I mean, if you're trying to gain weight, it's one of these things like I'm almost getting to that point where like thinking you have to eat like really, really dense stuff that's not really real food.
Yeah.
And like, okay, do it for a short period of time. Like maintenance of that tissue afterwards is less. Like building that tissue is like takes a lot sometimes to trigger that sort of anabolic response.
Right.
But yeah, and this is why like eating rice now, like I feel totally fine with it. It's not spiking my blood sugar. I don't feel like any crashes afterwards. I'm not too super concerned about long-term effects of any sort of plant nutrients or freaking out about that right now. Like I'm not introducing any sort of like cereal grains.
Yeah.
So that's just something whenever I eat them, I've been bloated and I've felt like crap, get acne, things like that. So I'm not incorporating those, but yeah, it's basically just potatoes I can tolerate, rice and berries. I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
You mentioned fruit. I was going to ask, is there any other fruits outside of berries that you've been seeing anything good with?
No.
I ate a banana like probably two months ago, maybe when I was wearing CGM, and it was incredible how much it spiked my blood sugar from one banana. Yeah. I don't remember the exact number, but it was like almost like doubling my blood sugar.
Yeah, I was surprised at plantains because there's so much starch in them, and you do actually pretty well with starch.
Yeah.
But it didn't work. It wasn't like an overly ripe plantain either. It was like pretty green.
Yeah.
So, what have you been eating?
Sweet potatoes is kind of the main. Sweet potatoes and blueberries have been the two main ones. I also have been using a little bit of the UCAN super starch around workouts, and then the sweet potato powder from Equip have been the main things that I've been doing. The one thing I would add too for people who are, if you like, we're talking so much about testing your blood sugar, is knowing that like what determines if you are able to tolerate that food isn't necessarily the degree in which the blood sugar spikes. It's the rate in which it gets back to baseline. It's kind of the way that I look at it. So
I mean, I look at both.
I think both. Yeah, both definitely play a role. But just because like a carb source should spike your blood sugar to some level. So just because you see a spike from a food doesn't mean that you shouldn't, that one's just out for you. It's like, what's the degree of the spike, but then also how long does it take it to get back to baseline, right? Like if you're getting back to baseline relatively quickly, like, less than an hour, like hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that, then that's probably a good sign that your body's handling those carbs relatively well.
Yeah. And beans is another one that I've been eating just to get more soluble fiber and just testing with that. So I've been trying a bunch recently. So Pinto have been great. Lima, not good. And so this is another thing where I'm just trying to figure out like what sources agree with me. Like I got super bloated off of Lima and didn't feel good, and blood sugars all over the place.
Yeah.
Pinto beans were nothing. And for both of these, we soaked them for like 24 hours ahead of time to sort of deactivate some of the phytic acid, things like that. And doing as much as we can in these, like rinsing the rice a bunch and stuff like that too. And like trying to prepare these in a way that offers the most nutrition with, removing much of the downside. So just trying to figure it out. I don't think like this is just, I always like to think about building my toolbox of health and figuring out stuff as it changes. And this is not to say, so I was imagining this when we were talking about how people are gonna be like, oh, well, you guys said keto was so great, and like now you're eating carbohydrates. It's like, we're just trying to, we're not saying keto is bad. We're not saying we changed our mind on things. We're saying that like there is a time and place for absolutely everything.
Right.
And trying to figure out right now, like what is the balance? Like what are these extremes? Zero carbohydrates, only meat.
Right.
I might do, you're gonna like this, I might do a plant-based experiment later in the year.
Oh boy.
Just to see, like, how do I feel?
Yeah.
How do I feel? I don't know. I can bash it all day long, but if I'm not testing this myself, like how can I critique things?
Right.
What if I found out that I actually feel incredible?
Right.
What if? Yeah. And it's like, I don't like these people who sort of only keep their mind focused on one thing and then fit everything to that narrative, only follow the people on Twitter who agree with them, and just parrot the same things over and over and over again. And I'm not saying like people should stop doing a ketogenic diet right now.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is if you're curious, you should experiment with yourself. Like we've done, like I've done hardcore keto type of stuff, carnivore-ish for a very long period of time. And I just wanted to see.
Yeah.
I was not feeling great. I was feeling super low energy. And like, it could be a lot of other reasons. And I'm like digging into this stuff. I'm feeling a little bit better now. Maybe stress, maybe sleep stuff like we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, is it a nutrition thing? Let's toy around with that and see.
Right.
And I think people should get curious about their own health and use nutrition as a lever to pull.
Yeah. I think two things to consider with it too is like, one, what's your current level of health, right? So like we both used keto at one point because we were trying to improve our health, right? Like we had, some probably metabolic inflexibility, metabolic damage somewhere, things weren't working appropriately, and we used it to get healthier. And I think, so it's like if you're somebody who's operating out of a place of, you're metabolically damaged, you need to lose weight, flat fasting blood sugars out of whack, stuff like that, we're probably talking about going a low carb approach. But, once you get to, the point where you've restored it, like, then it's thinking about what's your goal, right? Like, I think for me, if I'm like right now, I'm prioritizing performance a little bit because it's summertime. I want to get out and play and have a good time and like exercise and stuff. So, going to eat more carbs because that's going to align a little bit better with what I'm trying to do. But, in a couple months, if I decide to sit down and like, we're just hammer out like writing another book or something like that, I'm probably going to be looking more towards fasting and getting into ketosis and like carb restriction, because then I feel like my brain operates better like that. So I think it falls in line with what you're saying about finding the tools in your tool belt, right? Like what are you trying to prioritize? If it's brain function, well, now through trying these different things, what tool to pull out to achieve that. If it's weight loss, what tool to pull out to achieve that. Reset your gut, you got that, So I think like it's never cut and dry, right? Like I think anytime anybody says that like a diet is definitively the best for everybody in every situation, that's a good look at somebody who is extremely dogmatic and probably not a great source of information.
Which is why I've started to, a lot of people in keto have gone that way.
Yeah.
Which is why I've been starting to try to think outside of the box and be like, now that people over the last couple of years, we've helped a lot of people with perfect keto. And these are people, again, like who have type 2 diabetes or who have neurodegenerative disease or who are obese or metabolically broken, things like this, super inflamed. This has been a tremendous tool for them. But now I'm trying to think ahead of like, okay, in 2-3 years when these people are, maybe their goals are switching, maybe they now are optimizing for other things. Like how can we have the sort of the thought process and like experiment ahead of where the people we're helping are. And that's what I want to know. It's like, I think that there's going to be something in the middle where it's like, okay, what I hypothesize is like somewhere between like 50 and 100 grams of carbs will be of like real food sources will be the sweet spot for most people. And I think what it will look like is this path of like person born in Western civilization destroys their metabolism, gets some weird disease or some health problem, finds keto, swears by it for a while, does great, then has other goals of, whether it's performance or eating certain things or energy or whatever, then, figures out like how to eat carbohydrates, but then opts for going back and forth for whatever reasons like you were saying. So it's like, there's going to be this sort of template that I'm like, oh, okay, I've seen this before. And it's building this toolbox for people, but essentially like, when you shake them awake and you say, hey, you have control over your health, the first step is going to be keto for anywhere from like 1 to 3 years probably to get their metabolism truly to a point that makes sense to be able to add carbohydrates back in.
Yeah.
And then figuring out for them and their goals, like teach them, hey, you can use this for this and that and this. Like workouts have been phenomenal on carbs, to be honest.
Yeah.
I loved it. Like, and I've been doing a lot of like 2 workouts a day, 2+.
Yeah.
And comparing to how I felt last summer when we were doing this, even, when I was doing probably less activity.
Yeah.
Man, it's so much better.
Right.
I can just go nonstop. Like I'm not fatigued in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things I think is a little bit funny about it is like the original question here, we're talking about cyclical keto. And I think that like when you get to, like you and I have been experimenting with diets on ourselves and dieting and everything and like trying to learn as much as we can for years now, right? And you've been doing it for longer than I have. I think when you get to a point when you start like eating a bit more intuitively, like I would never consider myself to be like, oh, I'm following like a cyclic keto diet right now, or even saying that like I'm following a keto diet. Like it's just I eat with intention for what I'm trying to achieve, and that it can change, right? So like I don't think I ever wake up one morning and be like, oh, I forgot I'm on the cyclic keto diet right now. It's like, no, I incorporate carbs when I need to incorporate, which is like I get when you're first starting, if you've never paid attention to your diet before, and then today's day one of you paying attention to your diet, you kind of got to find the thing for you to stick to so you can learn. So whether that's, cyclic keto, paleo, plant-based, whatever it is, carnivore, you have to kind of pick something to stick to. But once you learn about yourself over time, it becomes a lot less about what diet you're following and just your diet is, like what the ancient Greeks used to refer to diet as anything that you expose your body to. So it was like, food, and then it was other things too, right? But it was like, your relationships and your exercise and everything was all encompassed into the phrase diet. But like diet just becomes what you put in your body. It's not that you're following carnivore, keto, whatever. It's just that you are eating food and that's your diet,
I mean, you make a good point about eating intuitively, because I've intentionally not done that because I've wanted to measure and experiment and say, okay, I want to eat every single day this same amount of carbohydrates. So I know that the carbohydrates are like the isolated thing and all this, whatever, which leads us to the next question. And we have a lot of different places to take this one, but
do you want me to go ahead and read that question off?
Yeah, that one, and then we'll dive.
So I think this is actually from the same group, Biohacking Chiropractors. It's what are your favorite carb sources for cycling out of ketosis?
Oh, that one? I thought it was like sort of the same question. I think it was just in different forms. So let's go to the next one.
Okay, guys. So next question is from MK Salazar, and it's any changes in your body comp this summer after you ramped up your carb intake?
Yeah, I've gotten fat.
You should see him.
Yeah, I mean, like not crazy amount. And we're talking like, so I got a DEXA scan before and after, and I was like, okay, I gained like 10 pounds total, which I assumed decent amount was some water being stored. Because like more carbs you eat, more glycogen you have. Yeah. More you just retain certain electrolytes, you're just going to store more water. So like, okay, like how much? But then I like started looking puffy. And so like, this is when I first was like 120-ish, 130-ish grams of carbs. about 100-ish of fat, and I was eating sort of everything at once or whatever, just like in a day, had the mindset of like a if it fits your macros person, which is as long as you hit these macros in a day, nothing matters and whatever. So I got an RMR test, I did a DEXA test. RMR is to test your metabolism at rest to see how many calories are you burning. And so the popular theory is, okay, you have this RMR, which mine was like 2,300, which is extremely high. And I think that a lot of that was from eating a ketogenic diet. So we'll talk about my retest. And then you have activity on top of that. So let's say my activity throughout a day with working out or whatever is anywhere between like 400 to 1,000 calories, right? So we're talking about like, for me to maintain my weight, that would be like 3,000-ish calories in a day. Okay, I was eating like 2,400 calories and 120 grams of carbohydrates, about 100 of fat, like 160 of protein, something like a roughly around that area. And then after 8 weeks, I retested both my RMR and my DEXA, and I gained 5 pounds. So DEXA is just basically an X-ray that looks at your fat composition and your muscle composition, your bone composition, separates everything out, sort of the gold standard of body composition. And I gained 5 pounds of fat and I lost a pound of muscle. So I could tell like I was like certainly like less lean. And it's not like I'm not an obese person and I'm fairly lean. So it's like, it's not that big of a deal for me. Obviously I prefer not to have 5 extra pounds of fat on my body. But it made me like, be like, okay, this shit isn't working. Clearly that if it fits your macros crowd is just flat out wrong. Like I've measured every single thing I've eaten in a day over the last 12 weeks, probably.
Yeah.
I've measured everything. Take a measuring cup out, have a scale, weigh all my meat, everything. Just because I've wanted this to be a legit experiment. And if that was the case, if calories in equals calories out, as people say all the time, which I don't think is completely wrong, but I don't think is like the only thing to look at, I should have lost weight. Should have lost weight. I literally took a gas exchange of what I was burning and got a literal amount of calories I was burning in a day.
Yeah.
And then I was eating under that and I gained fat. Okay.
Yep.
So
you mean like different macronutrients might like react in your body differently from each other?
Yeah. Or different things may cause fat loss or fat gain, or, I mean, there's
your environment might play a role or something.
Hormones, all stress, sleep.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the point here is that like we've talked a little bit, I think in some past Q&A episodes about the calories in versus calorie out thing. And I think that we're pretty in the middle on it where it's like they definitely play a role, but it's clear that like they aren't the only thing that matters. Yeah. And it's one of those topics where everybody jumps in a club. It's like you're either calories in versus calories out club or you're in a calories don't matter. It's like, well, neither one of those are true. What matters is that like they matter, they play a role. And I think like, I mean, so why do you think then that you put on fat if you're sticking to it? I mean, obviously you're saying that something was going on that like you put together these macros, you put this plan in place and it doesn't work. What was the reason? Was it something else that you were doing? Yeah. Was it stress levels? Was it not getting enough sleep, choosing the wrong foods? Like what was the thing that made it not work for you? Yeah. So my main hypothesis I'm testing now is keeping, what happened is I kept basically fat fairly high and also carbs fairly high. I mean, high for me. Yeah. High for most people is like 300 plus grams, which is insane that I've looked at food logs of other people eating like literally 250 plus grams of carbohydrates. It's insane. Like, right. I'm right now I'm at 160 and like choking them down per day. And I don't know how people do it. So my hypothesis is like your body primarily runs on one energy source, carbohydrates or fat. And if you put them both in and eat them both specifically at the same time, that is going to cause fat gain rapidly. And the reason why is when your body has carbohydrates in its bloodstream, you preferentially use the carbohydrates for energy. And carbohydrates in your bloodstream, like you have like a teaspoon worth of glucose, breakdown carbohydrate in your bloodstream. Anything more than that is essentially poison. And your body goes, okay, let's use this shit immediately. If not, we need to store it. And so if fat is in your body and it requires energy to like figure out how to store carbohydrates, like your body has to use a lot of resources to either put it to use or put it into a storage form, right? Triglyceride and fat. Whereas fat can very readily be put into fat. And so if you have both carbohydrate and fat in your bloodstream at the same exact time,
even if you have demands to put, like, let's say we just played basketball and I eat a bunch of carbohydrate, but also have fat in there. Your body goes, oh, all this carbohydrate in the bloodstream. What are we going to do? Fat, you can easily go store over here in the fat cells. Go do that. Carbohydrate, I'm going to need you to go into the glycogen stores and refill here, so that way we can replenish what's going on over here.
Yeah.
So because the fat is so easily put into fat cells, when you eat carbohydrate and fat at the same time, my hypothesis, like I've not looked into this much. So again, like completely saying this is just like what I think based upon nothing besides what I know without looking at this very in depth, is that everything is going to be stored as fat when you eat protein or fat and carbohydrates together.
Yeah.
When you look at this in nature and just thinking like, okay, how would this sort of like make sense in the natural world? You look at what foods contain both fat and carbohydrate. Like, are there any foods that contain both fat and carbohydrate? Will this ever have ever been found in nature? Mm-hmm. And the answer is very sparingly. But when you look at it, there's only a couple really good examples. One of them is dairy. Mm-hmm. So all dairy products have a high amount of carbohydrate. In fact, they have really good natural fats and also a lot of milk sugars. When does dairy, like what is actually supposed to be consuming dairy? We consume dairy all through our life. What actually should be consuming dairy?
I mean, babies.
An infant thing that should be growing as fast as humanly possible and putting on weight.
Right.
Okay. Then the next one is nuts, but especially like an acorn is like the perfect, like basically exactly what I was eating. Mm-hmm. What eats nuts and what time of the year?
I mean, what, animals? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like
things animals that are like trying to put on weight.
Yeah, for hibernation. Yeah. So when you look at like past that, there's essentially no other foods. Like you have some outliers, like avocado, which is sort of a tropical thing. I see it as an outlier. A lot of it's fiber, anyways. But when you look at what's high in carbohydrate and high in fat at the same time, you get foods that are naturally meant to put weight on things, to either grow to survive or to stock up fat for scarcity winter coming to survive.
Right.
And so since then, I've actually reduced my fat and said, okay, I'm going to train my body to work on primarily this macronutrient. And I've separated entirely my fat, from like added things. So like everything has a little bit of fat, a little bit of carbs, whatever. Like it's not 0.0 grams. But it's like I'm not putting butter on my rice. I'm not eating things like that. And I've separated like my fatty meat intake from my carbs. Mm-hmm. And so fat and protein, and both fat and carbs, those things exist together also. Yeah. But not fat and carbs very often. Yeah. Separated all of those. And since then, I haven't done a DEXA scan since that point, but like I can tell just looking at myself in the mirror, and my weight has, like my fat levels have gone down. Yeah. So without changing macros,
calories,
I've now seemingly going the other way, which again, we'll check to DEXA scan. I'm not saying every single human is going to react this way. Yeah. But for me, and in general, I think that eating carbs and fat together is a really bad idea. Like choose one or the other and primarily focus on that. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say like I only eat carbs for the day. So I eat around my workouts, like I was saying before, I'm stashing all my carbs and a lot of my protein around that. And then I eat a really high fat, moderate or high protein meal later on as well. So like I'm still eating fat. I'm just now taking it away from the carbohydrate entirely. Right. Which again is like, it's normal for like what we would have seen foraging. It's like maybe you kill an animal, you eat an animal or whatever, and like you've gathered some things that are carbohydrate, sure. But like you see something that's super high in carbohydrate, you're never going to eat anything else with it. Right. Yeah. It's like you stumble upon a berry patch or something like that, or a beehive with honey in it. It doesn't have an additional source of fat. Like nothing that's really, really high in carbohydrate is also high in fat. Yeah. So that's sort of a philosophy that I'm thinking about testing longer term. Mm-hmm. But I would love to know if anybody has any research around that stuff.
Well, that's what I was just going to say is I think it's great because like the narrative that you're telling around it, I think matches up, right? So it makes sense to say it that way. But then also from a biochemistry standpoint, it checks out that way too. When you consume, like there is a lot of research around when you consume carbohydrates, you're altering your hormone profile as well as like certain enzymes that play an important role in fat oxidation. So, like when insulin levels are spiking, glucagon levels are lower, fat burning kind of gets shut down. But then there's also enzymes, mitochondrial enzymes that get altered or get inhibited through carbohydrate consumption that prevents fat oxidation from occurring. So it's not even just like the narrative is great with it and it makes sense, to say it that way. But even from a biochemistry standpoint, what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, which is what you're saying, like on a cellular level, if you eat both carbs and fat at the same time, your body is basically going to prevent fat from being used as fuel. Because a cascade of different events that are happening.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it checks out. It checks out on that level too. And I agree. That's something I've been using like myself when I look at it that way, where it's like, if you're pairing macronutrients, which macronutrients pair well, protein and carbs are great and fat and protein is great. And I think that like those are like when I'm consuming, if I'm having like sweet potatoes or something like that, I'm probably going to be having a little bit leaner of a meat choice. Or if I'm using like a sweet potato powder before a workout, I'm going to be just like pairing that with a beef liver, with like a beef protein or something like that. The beef protein's lean, right? So there's not like a ton of extra fat in it. That's usually the way that I'm doing it too. And I mean, when you look at like hierarchy of fuel utilization, it's the same thing too. It's like your body isn't going to, I mean, sure, we're oversimplifying it a little bit because we're essentially, the way we're wording it now makes it seem like these macronutrients are only energy molecules, and they're not. There's obviously so many other things that your body can do with fat. But from an energy standpoint, consuming them both together, I think from both an ancestral point and from a biochemistry standpoint, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and the crazy thing too is like if you look at donuts, pizza, ice cream, all these traditional extremely fatty foods, French fries, etc., they have like the same macronutrient profile as acorns.
Right.
They all do. And like we are programmed to want these foods.
Yeah.
Because your body goes, shit, we don't know when we're ever going to get food again. You need to get fat as much as possible.
Right.
And that has been an advantageous thing for hundreds of thousands of years until the last 50.
Yeah.
And now we try to like fight it and override it. But we have the most easy to combine things with fat and carbohydrate.
Yeah.
And low protein too.
I think the other thing to think about too is just like from a food availability standpoint too, like you're talking about nuts and stuff. It's like for you to have, ancestrally speaking, for you to have gotten nuts, you would have had to have worked for them. Like you wouldn't just go to the supermarket and pick up a box full of a bag full of almonds, and then sit down and just munch on those continuously. Like you'd be like climbing a tree and picking these things down. Or
and they usually have a crazy shell. And you need to bust the shell
break
up.
The shell open.
And it's only like usually like summer to fall.
Right. So you're not sitting there. I mean, no, you wouldn't have sat down like the way it is now. It's like I said, you go to a store, you buy a 2-pound bag of almonds, and then you can sit on the couch and just throw them down all day. It's like that would have never happened that easily. You would have gotten tired and been sick of busting shells before you could have ever really overate those things anyway.
Right. And yeah, I mean, these are the things that, like, again, eating seasonally.
Yeah.
Eating to close to your genetics, but if you can, just the easiest thing is just a farmer's market. Go to the farmer's market, eat what's there.
Yeah.
And it's typically not going to be a giant bag of macadamia nuts.
Right.
And that's why I think that people switch to a ketogenic diet have a lot of benefit because they're removing carbohydrates, which helps with the metabolism a little bit, but still don't see a lot of crazy results because they're still having energy toxicity to some degree.
Right.
They're still overeating on fat. So you're eating foods in amounts that just don't exist.
Right.
And so we're decoupling the availability for people to eat fat and carbs at the same time when people are on a ketogenic diet because they're just getting fat.
Right.
And I think that's really advantageous for a lot of different reasons. But you can still overeat fat really easily.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, these are the things that I'm trying to experiment with and like really figure out. But my hypothesis is that long term, what we're going to see is like the best thing for a human is probably somewhere between 50 to 100 grams of carbs from real food sources, but only if your metabolism can handle carbohydrates in the first place and can switch from burning fat to burning carbohydrates and back and forth really easily. And most people can't do that. So I'm assuming we should probably make some sort of like metabolic checklist of like, can you tolerate carbohydrates? Can this happen or whatever? Like, it's one of the easiest ways to do it is probably just thinking about it right now. Like, can you go a day right now with fasting and feel fine?
Yeah. Are you asking me?
No.
Just like that'd be first question.
Yeah, rhetorical.
For sure.
Because right now, and I've done this a couple of times with this experiment, I'm like, am I getting reliant on carbohydrates? I'm not going to eat today and see how I feel. And like, I have not felt sort of like lethargic and a crash and terrible this whole time.
Yeah.
There's been a few days where I haven't eaten the entire day and felt entirely fine.
Right.
Which tells me that I can access my body fat on command, that extra 5 pounds that I put on. But it's not a problem. Whereas 7 years ago, if I tried to fast before 24 hours is over, I'm like dying.
Right.
Energy's terribly low. I'm like lethargic, angry, needing to eat immediately. And that's not the case now.
Right.
And if you can't do that, regardless, because like a lot of people eat a ketogenic diet and still are eating all the time and can't go on like eating their own body fat, using their own body fat. And like I would say your metabolism probably still isn't at a point. Do I say that you need to fast to get there? Not necessarily. There's a lot of different roads to get there, but there's going to be a lot of reasons like, okay, prove to me that you're metabolically healthy. Okay. If you're not, do something that looks like sort of like a real food ketogenic diet. Okay. Once you are metabolically healthy on that for some determined amount of time, like 1 month to 3 years plus, depending on your history, then prove to me you're metabolically healthy. And then, okay, this checks out. Let's start to add carbohydrates and then sort of balance it out where you feel. I don't think over like 100-ish grams is going to be beneficial really to many people, like unless it's a very specific reason,
Performance,
specific performance, things like that. But for the average person, you're not going to need much more than that.
Right. I think like when talking about the energy concept, it's like know thyself is probably a little bit important. Like if you are living a very sedentary lifestyle and you're sitting at a desk, you like having 200 grams of carbs and like 150 grams of fat every day is way more than what your body needs to operate. Right. So it's like, I think that's another good way to look at it. Yeah.
And I guess coming soon this fall, Carb Answers. our new manifesto. Yeah. I just want people to know, like, we're not flip-flopping. Again, I want the best information for not only myself, but for everybody who's been experimenting with ketogenic diet. And like, I don't think that having to be afraid of this stuff, like, I don't think, for instance, also you should be afraid of having siete chips and guac and like, oh, there's a carbon fat, I should never do that again. It's like, no, you need to understand your goals. And if your goal is not to put in a lot of fat, like, probably not a good idea. But then again, like that one meal that time, not problematic.
Right.
If you're eating it every single meal for 8 weeks at a time, you'll get fat like me.
Right.
And so this is a problem. But like, you still need to like understand your goals and where you're at with certain things and not freak out all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that like, anytime that you're operating, I mean, we work in the diet industry and to a point, right? Like we work in the health industry. Diet and nutrition is something that's like really important to us. I think that anytime you do that, it's very easy to be dogmatic. I know that like when I first started studying keto in grad school, I was extremely dogmatic. And I would say even up until recently was very dogmatic in my views for it. Keto, low carb dieting and stuff like that. And I think it's like, I think it's a good sign of like, just looking at things a little bit more holistically, getting access to new information, trying to hear different perspectives, and knowing that like I said, earlier in the episode, anytime somebody says that like one diet is definitively the answer for everybody in every situation, that that's somebody who's not considering a lot of things. And I think that, we always talk about like, how like the best diet is probably like an omnivorous diet, right? Where it's like, anything outside of like a diet that is based around moderation is probably an extreme diet in some way, right? Like if you're completely removing a macronutrient group, that's an extreme diet. If you're overeating a ton of a macronutrient group, that's an extreme diet. And I think that if you like, depending on where your health's at, it might take extreme measures to restore you. If you've been chronically overeating carbohydrates for a decade and you have 100 pounds that you need to lose, like, an omnivorous, moderate carb, moderate fat diet probably isn't going to do what you need it to do. You probably have to go to that extreme version of completely cutting out this macronutrient group so you can restore your health. But I think that when we get back to a space of being at baseline health, I think that you can go away from these extreme approaches and go more towards a diet centered around moderation, which I think, it's like the funniest word in health. Everybody talks about, moderation, but I think there's a lot of truth to it, right? Like we shouldn't overeat carbs. We shouldn't be overeating anything. We also don't want to be like drastically undereating anything for too long periods of time. I think the answer tends to fall right in the middle for a lot of diet related topics.
Yeah. I mean, you have some lobbyists arguing that moderation of drinking soda is okay. I don't know. I think that eat real food.
Right.
Figure that out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, another way to look at this before we wrap up is 12% estimated. I think there was some study recently that 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy right now. So what that means is that what we're talking about in this episode
doesn't apply to 88% of these people.
Chances are unless you're of that 12%, a ketogenic diet is going to be right for you until we start flipping this around and it's 12% need a ketogenic diet. Like this whole episode we're talking about and eating carbohydrates isn't going to be relevant to a lot of people.
Right.
And that's why I think that ketogenic diet is still great. So that means that for that 88% of people, keto is probably a good path back to normalcy and back to restoring metabolism. And I'm just trying to stay ahead of the curve here. I mean, we've put out a lot of information about ketogenic diet. I don't even know what more we could do. And as we start helping people bridge that gap, I want to be ahead of things and be like, okay, now when you're this 12%, let's start using carbohydrates strategically for different reasons. And that's why we're doing this here.
Well, and a lot of people that have been following you for the last few years have moved from the 88% to the 12%, right? So they're kind of looking for what that, like we hear, how many success stories do we hear of people losing 50, 100, 150 plus pounds on a keto diet? It's like, those are the people who are starting to get into that 12% range. And those are people whose goals are going to start shifting away from weight loss and things. And that's when I think we need to start considering these other tools like you mentioned.
Yeah. All right. Until next time.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Natural State Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you heading over to whatever service you're listening to this podcast on, dropping me a 5-star review and your thoughts on the show. This helps us get discovered by more people and spreading the good gospel of health. And if you want to stay plugged into all of my self-health experiments, recent research and books that I'm reading and my interpretations of those things, products that I'm testing and thoughts on all things related to health, check out my free weekly newsletter called The Feed. You can sign up for that at dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. That's dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. Thanks again for tuning in and your support of the Natural State Podcast.